Hi, I'm Mebe Ballard. This past summer, while we were having church virtually, I led a Sunday school class for elementary age kids. As I planned out my lessons, I wanted to use different visuals to show the children. Most of the materials I found online were homogeneous, and by that I mean the characters all looked very white. Since I teach kids from various backgrounds, I became curious about Sunday school materials that had illustrations that reflected the diverse audience of children who would consume them. So today, I want to talk to you more about the representation of biblical characters through art and why it matters. In order to understand why the study of depictions of biblical characters is important, first you need to understand the varied history of the ways in which Americans have chosen to portray biblical characters, and in particular, Jesus. So before we get into my research, what do you think of when you imagine Jesus? There's some common images that have permeated American Christian culture, like this picture, the head of Christ, which was painted by Warner Salmon in 1940. It's the all-time most reproduced image of Jesus. There's Sacred Heart Jesus, and maybe you've seen some like this, where Jesus is holding a lamb. I'd always assumed that these types of images were inherited from European iconography, but I learned through further research that that was incorrect. It turns out that the United States has played a crucial role in the development of the imagery of Jesus for the rest of the world. At first, the early American colonists didn't have any iconographic images in their households because of Puritan influences. But as the colonists continued to take control of the land and enslave and kill both indigenous people as well as enslaved Africans, a fraudulent document called the Publius Lentulus Letter began to circulate. The Publius Lentulus letter was written from the perspective of a Roman official writing to the Roman Senate. It contains details of Jesus' appearance, with descriptions like hair the color of an unripe hazelnut, which is very light blonde, and many of the descriptions are paired with moral qualities. This letter was originally debunked by the Puritans, but over the course of the 19th century, the reputation of the letter ascended with white supremacy. The effects of this letter were seen throughout popular culture as well. This white Jesus made an appearance in the 1915 film Birth of a Nation. This film is now infamous for inspiring the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan and portraying black people as dangerous, unintelligent, and sexually aggressive towards white women. It was the first motion picture ever to be shown at the White House. As the film concludes, a white-skinned, brown-haired Jesus appears on screen to bless the United States. Also of note is Joseph Smith's vision of Christ, who had a light complexion and blue eyes. Although Smith was considered an outsider by most Christians in America, he and the birth of the new church called the Jesus Christ Church of Latter-day Saints played a part in this new imagery of Christ. During the early 19th century, amidst growing anti-Catholic sentiments, the first mass-produced printed images of Jesus were distributed throughout the United States. Images of a white Jesus began to appear in Bibles, in almanacs, newspapers, and tracts distributed for evangelical purposes. The Publius Lentulus letter was not officially debunked until the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. The first illustrated American Bible was created in 1791 by Isaiah Thomas in Worcester, Massachusetts. It contained 55 engraved plates. In 1846, 15 years before the Civil War began, Harper and Brothers in New York City published the Harper's Illuminated Bible. This was widely regarded as the publishing event of the century and included over 1,600 detailed illustrations. Another important concept to understand from my research is how racial representation in picture books affects children. The average children's illustrated Bible is intended for children 3 to 8 years old. The age period of 3 to 7 is considered a critical development period in which children are able to differentiate between skin colors, learn labels associated with different skin colors, and develop emotional responses to these labels, making these years the most crucial for establishing positive racial attitudes in children. Additionally, minority children began to experience conflict between their racial identities and the stereotypes of our society during this age period, which indicates that children's positive view on their racial and ethnic identities depend on positive associations. Children can be consciously and unconsciously affected by the racial stereotypes presented to them in picture books. There is a great responsibility to present children with positive images of various racial and ethnic groups, particularly because identity formation is not a linear process. Although there has been studies on the representation of biblical characters through history, there has not been extensive research on the ways biblical characters are drawn for children's illustrated Bibles. After realizing this gap, I wanted to further research how race and gender are represented in children's illustrated Bibles. I gathered illustrations from 5 Bibles: the Jesus Storybook Bible, the Read and Learn Bible, the Beginner's Bible, the Children of God Storybook Bible, and the Little Girl's Bible Storybook. These texts were gathered from churches in the Jackson metro area. I chose to analyze images from 3 different stories: Adam and Eve, one featuring Jesus, and one featuring an angel, for a total of 15 analyzed images. I then used critical discourse analysis to code for differences in skin tone, hair texture, and clothing. My first step was to look through each of the book's table of contents and identify matching stories throughout. I ended up selecting the story of Adam and Eve as my Old Testament selection, and the resurrection as my selection for the angel. For my text featuring Jesus, I selected the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. I then scanned the selected pages using a scanner, then sent the scans as both PDF and PNG files to my computer. I loaded each image into a website called imagecolorpicker.com, where I was able to get the specific RGB code of each character's hair, skin, and clothing color. I then entered those RGB codes into a website called colorblindness.com in order to get a specific name for each color as well as the underlying hue. I then matched the skin tone colors to a shade chart so I could label them as either fair, olive, light brown, brown, or dark brown. Before I move further into my analysis, some notes about my text. First, the Children of God Storybook Bible had a different illustrator for each story. Secondly, the Little Girl's Bible Storybook was the only text that was intended for a specific gender. After analyzing the images, some initial codes became apparent. Most notably were the differences in skin tone. The 4 different characters, Adam and Eve, Jesus, and the angel, had distinct skin tone shade differences. Adam and Eve were overall the darkest in skin tone across all text, followed by Jesus. The angels had the lightest skin tone overall. Most of them didn't even match a shade on the skin tone chart because they were so light. An unexpected trend that arose after my coding was that across the illustrations, women consistently have a lighter skin tone than men. Most differences were only a shade or 2, but it was still a consistent and notable trend. Similarly, the same pattern existed within the hair color. Adam and Eve had the darkest hair color, followed by Jesus. Across all of the text, 5 out of 6 angels had golden or yellow-toned hair, which was the lightest of any of the characters. This research has some limitations. For instance, I was not able to code for the appearance of every character within these books. Future research could be done on other characters, and, in particular, the appearance or lack of different skin tones within crowd or group scenes. So, why does this matter? Many churches are doing the important work of racial reconciliation within their congregations and communities. This type of research can be used to highlight the lack of diversity within Bible study materials and draw attention to the need to produce content that better represents the Christian community, which is full of all races and nationalities.